As much as we all like to rip on men, this is time to take some accountability.
I'm going to go ahead and grant, for the sake of this conversation, that she's much more qualified than the men.
Okay,
but
then yeah.
She's still leaving you with 6, 7, 8 weeks where she won't be working for you.
She'll take it for the team.
How? I don't understand how that
would work a little harder during that time and let the woman
She
rest.
wouldn't be working at all.
No, I'm saying that
So the other employees have to pick up the slack.
That's not what I'm saying.
That's what she's saying.
It depends on the situation completely, but companies purposefully not hiring pregnant or suspected to be pregnant women is a big issue. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're taking time off. Everyone takes time off. Everyone's eventually going to take time off.
Yeah, sure. Let me ask you a question. A woman-owned business, would you be fine with them not wanting to hire men because they're men?
No.
You'd be okay with that?
No, I would not. Everyone should be hired no matter what.
On their credentials.
But let me ask you this. So,
on their credentials. If a man is more qualified than a woman, hire the man.
Okay, so just to be clear, you don't think that a woman who's running a company and she wants to predominantly hire women and not hire men, you would be against that? You would say, no, you have to hire men?
Yeah.
Okay. What if the woman had she had negative experiences with men and she doesn't want to hire men because of that?
That's emotional.
I don't think that's something that is, if that has happened, I don't think that's correct.
Wouldn't you make the argument that a lot of women have had negative experiences with men?
Yeah, but
as in being sexually assaulted in the workplace,
like I'll say,
it could be violent. It could be violence. It could be SA.
As a business owner, and I am a woman business owner, hiring a male in a forward-facing position would not be good for my business. I specialize in photography for married women who are creating private art for their husbands. So I have had a male photo editor at one point, but he was into men. He wasn't the kind of guy who's going to jerk off to the ladies' pictures. So in some positions.
Let me get this straight. So you're openly practicing sexism at your own company, and you're stating this all on the internet. That doesn't seem too smart.
Men are not fit for the job, even though they would beg to do it because they want to see inside the doors of what happens behind the boudoir
That's
studio.
a great point. Most businesses who aren't dealing with women's naked photos, I think it doesn't matter the gender, and I think discriminating against anyone is not correct. However, if you're a boudoir photo editor or someone who specializes in filming or editing naked women, it makes sense for a company to say, I only want women.
Why?
Because the customer, who's the most important part of the business, might say, I don't want a man looking at these photos.
But in the adult industry, it's mostly men holding the camera and doing the editing, which is why the perspective that most porn is shot from is the male gaze.
Yeah, but like you said, your company does photos of married women who want to take photos for their husbands.
Correct.
If those women say specifically, I'm paying for this service and I don't want a man editing or looking at these photos, I think it's totally valid to only hire women.
What do you think about childcare?
It depends on the couple, but...
No, like a childcare company, and they discriminate.
Like a childcare company.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an example, like a daycare. Would you be okay with them discriminating against having male daycare employees?
No.
They discriminate based on criminal record, and if you're in the adult industry, as in they don't think adult industry people should be babysitting kids at a daycare, or if you have a violent criminal record, you have no place in a daycare. But their sex or gender of daycare people is irrelevant.
Yeah, men should not, I'm not saying men should be discriminated against for different positions. I'm just saying, look at everyone. And a lot of companies are, because of the way that the world has been set up, a lot of companies are controlled by men, and so slowly but surely the line goes down and women are more and more discriminated against in the workplace because of the way that those companies have started. I'm not trying to say that in the 1800s when these companies were started, like Wells Fargo or whatever, that it makes sense for, I'm not saying that it's bad that a man runs that company. I'm saying that it's bad if that man has a history of discriminating.
But okay, I'd still like to get an answer on this, the wage gap. Explain precisely what the wage gap is.
that women get paid less than men for the same job in a lot of different companies.
I also think women are afraid to ask for more money, and there's a lot of women are afraid to ask for more money, and they have a lot of like issues with that. And men are not afraid of that. Men will ask, "Hey, I need this, and that." And woman is very much not like that, so the men take advantage of that also.
But so what I'm asking though is when we're looking at the wage gap, when you hear these numbers, what specifically is it looking at?
What do you mean?
So are you comparing all the money that women make in the country
No.
versus all the money that the men make
No,
in the
I'm not
country?
looking at that.
So what specifically are you saying it's controlled?
No. I'm saying in a lot of different jobs, might not be this one, it might not be other jobs in LA specifically, but in a lot of jobs, if I applied for a job and a male counterpart of mine applied for a job, a male would be offered more money or given more money for a very similar.
There is absolutely no merit to her claims. Everything she's saying right now is just a feeling, it's an emotion deep down inside, and just treat it like a conspiracy.
Similar job because he's a man. And even if you haven't seen that your very self in this industry that you work in, it is still a thing in a lot of industries.
Well, my industry that I work in, I can talk broadly about the entertainment industry. You live in Los Angeles, for example. There's been actually hiring practices where they're actually excluding the hiring of white people and white men specifically, and men specifically. There's massive amounts of affirmative action in the entertainment industry. So this idea that there's and it's not just affirmative action in the entertainment industry. We see this in all industries. Women predominate in HR, and women are overwhelmingly the one who are making hiring decisions at these companies. I guess what I'm trying to get to with the wage gap is, so the wage gap doesn't, the one that's often cited, 72 cents, 82 cents, 84 cents, who knows, it's always changing, is it's looking at the full-time earnings of all women and comparing it to the full-time earnings of all men. It doesn't account for hours worked, it doesn't account for overtime, it doesn't account for commute time, it doesn't account for hazard pay, it doesn't account for the type of job, it doesn't account for a dozen different metrics. It's just simply comparing the money that women make to the money that men make. And so if it was the case that men work more, for example, which they do, men work more hours than women, you start to see it shrink. And then if you start looking at specific industries and you compare like for like, it shrinks more. You'd agree with me that men and women pursue different things when it comes to college education, academia, and career.
But do you know why?
Choice.
No.
Yes, it's absolutely choice. Women have any choice that they can pursue.
Yes.
You have a tax attorney, a corporate attorney on the panel.
Okay.
She's not relegated to being a secretary.
I'm not saying that.
And she's also an immigrant too. She's an immigrant and a woman and would you consider her a person of color?
Yeah, that's why I would agree that it's really your personal pursuit whether you want to stick with your dream. And I don't personally think there's a significant wage gap. I can only speak to my own industry, that I have compared salaries with my colleagues. Of course, we all, no matter men or women, we all started pretty much similar salary. I think the only wage gap that could happen later on was because of course, women, they have childbearing responsibility, they have child care responsibilities, because usually I have to say the women have to make more sacrifices in the early stage after the child is born. So they have to take a lot more time off to take care of the child and maybe have to make difficult career decisions to step back from promotion opportunities. But I think from the starting point, I think we are pretty equal in terms of my industry.
However, would you agree that more women since birth are pushed to being things that make less money than men?
I think that's more a personal choice. Some women, they may choose to step back and take a more, to have more work-life balance to take care of their family. So that's why they will go into HR and secretary jobs. And of course, women who choose to be more ambitious and career-oriented, they may take on some more difficult jobs, like becoming a doctor or lawyer or some other
Can I ask,
leadership positions.
Have you only lived in Los Angeles?
I have actually lived in China, in Canada, and Europe, and US.
Okay, so lots of liberal areas.
I wouldn't say so because
Canada, Europe,
I wouldn't say
LA.
China. I mean, I mean, American government
not
has
China,
been
but you
always
moved
saying
here
there's
for a
so much
reason.
propaganda like going on in China. So I wouldn't say China is like liberal. And actually, a
Yes.
lot of Americans think China is very behind on liberal
Yes,
issues.
of course.
So
But I mean, in like the States and like whatever, have you only lived in LA and where'd you say?
LA and DC. But I don't think your political opinions or your personal values are affected by like where you're geographically located.
Well, I know plenty of people who grew up in like more conservative areas, smaller towns, southern towns, who would say that since birth they have been pushed towards more idealistic feminism gender roles where like they were told to be more girly and to not apply themselves to more male
As
jobs.
in, like the parents who tell their daughters just to go to college so they can find a husband.
Exactly.
As in, so my mother's father, who was a World War II that was in the Navy, he sent all of his daughters to college so they could go find husbands. Now, that is still a thing. There's also generational, like I'm from a town where there's women who are generationally having babies to live off of welfare. And that is something that was like their mother raised them that way, and they think that they just need to get knocked up. They don't need to be with the man, so they get the government benefits. There are problems with the United States. So I think sometimes immigrants have a better attitude coming into the U.S. and they honestly feel like the world is their oyster, whereas when you're born, whether I think your economic or financial situation makes a big difference
Totally.
on the type of opportunities or fair wages that you get. I think a lot of women barely graduate high school, already have kids. There was a daycare in the high school in the city that I went to.
Yeah.
I mean, those women never got to figure out who they were or wanted to be, but they're already mothers of two. And
The way that they speak of these women is like they're victims, almost like they didn't make the choice to become single mothers.
they're dealing with that. Now they're 35 messaging me on Facebook saying, your life looks like so much fun. Because I'm single, haven't had kids, no divorces. On paper, I'm like total wifey material.
Just because you're childless, single, and available doesn't make you wifey material. Wifey material is the essence about you, and it usually comes from a traditional vibe.
Something people say to me is like, it's not fair that you're talking about these issues when you don't have these issues. I'm very lucky to be, I grew up in Los Angeles, California, very liberal. I grew up with very liberal parents. I'm not poor. I have a good life. I went to a good liberal high school and I go to a college. You know, I have so many wonderful rights.
I grew up very close to the Amish country.
Yeah.
Virginville, Blue Ball, Intercourse, Pennsylvania. Those,
Even, Pennsylvania, Amish country.
there is all sorts of things happening, and men who are told they have to marry a woman, and there's a lot of arranged marriage, but these guys are actually on Grindr.
Exactly.
You know, I drove through the town with my friend who prefers men, and he got on the app, and he couldn't believe all these hot farmer boys that are popping up.
I'm sorry, what does this have to do with the wage gap? But so back to this.
It
Just
depends
saying
where
that
you are
it
and how
depends
you
where
grew
you
up.
are, and it depends how you're raised with the wage gap. But like,
Because you're certainly not talking about entry-level positions. Like a Domino's Pizza hires people at minimum wage, no matter if you're a lady or a man.
or like
So
in
you're
Los
talking
Angeles,
about-
the wage gap is way less likely to be found.
Well, actually, in major cities, if you look at single childless women between the ages of 18 to 29 in most like metro city areas, they actually out-earn men. So
Good for them.
Again, but I guess when it comes to the wage gap, there is an earnings gap. So the earnings gap is you're not looking at factors like hours worked, you're not looking at job, you're just literally comparing the money that men make and the money that women make. There's an earnings gap. The question you need to ask yourself is
Well,
not whether it exists, but why it exists. You would probably say it's due to sexism and patriarchy and misogyny and all this stuff. I don't think it has anything to do with sexism, really.
So what does it have to
Well,
do
you know
with?
what? I'll actually make the argument that does have to do with sexism. It has to do with women's sexism.
Such as?
Sure, I'll give you a couple examples. Would you say that people who are motivated are more likely to earn more money?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you say that people who have a desire for status are more likely to earn more money?
Yeah.
When it comes to dating, it is a dating podcast after all.
Right.
I don't know if your own preferences are going to align with this. Would you say that men or women are more likely to prefer a high earning partner? You don't know?
So that was a f***ing lie.
She's playing dumb. Everybody knows that women want their spouse to make more money than them.
Status. Do you think men or women prefer, have a preference for status in a partner?
I don't know. I
don't
think
know?
men prefer women of lower status so that they can be more dominating in their relationship. Men often fear women who have more status or more money.
I would dispute
It's not a fear. It's more of an annoyance.
that, but I'll go ahead,
really depends
for the
on
sake
the
of conversation, for the sake of argument, I'll go ahead and grant that. Is that your actual worldview?
I would say and not because of my views or because of their views, because of the way that the U.S. has been shaped with men being on top. Not a bad thing. It just happened that way because of the way that we evolved or whatever.
When you say evolved, what do you mean? Are you saying there's like natural evolutionary
Because
reasons
men
for...
were, so if we go all the way back to like the start of
Let's go
evolution,
back. Sure.
women were known to stay more at the home or the little hut or whatever
The
to
hut.
take care of...
The cave.
Right, to take care of the children and
Yeah.
the crops and the society.
And one question.
And
One
men
question.
wait,
really
wait,
quick.
wait, wait.
One question. Wait. I swear I'll let you finish. I just got one quick question. Back in the hut days, the cave days.
Yeah.
Were there air-conditioned office jobs?
No.
Okay. Go ahead. Continue.
Women were more likely to stay home because they were more valuable.
Stop the cap.
Men can impregnate multiple women. Women can't be pregnant with multiple
Wait.
people at once.
You're saying
so men were chosen.
Women were more valuable back in the...
Men were chosen to go out and hunt because if one of them dies in the hunt, it's not as irreparable damage as if a woman died.
Wait, so women, even historically speaking,
Yes.
were more valued than men?
Yes.
Wouldn't that totally contradict
Can I just say
No.
one thing?
everything you've been saying so far?
Because slowly, as men realized that they could leverage the fact that they went out and quote unquote provided.
Can I just say one thing? There would be no men without women. So like we birthed
Okay,
them.
You serious?
And there would be no women without men. What's your point?
There would be no
Okay,
women
but-
without men.
but-
There would be no
I don't
food
understand
stores
what- I
without
don't
men.
understand.
Okay,
in the cave days.
but women could technically go hunt.
I thought women were supposed to be so much smarter than men.
But men would say,
But women needed the protein.
Hold on.
men would say, we're gonna go hunt because if 3 out of 10 men die, it's way better for the society.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
And is that
than
your
if-
view?
No, that's the
Are you
truth.
saying men are disposable? Just
No.
curious. Well, you just said it's better if men die.
In the olden days, when there was no anything that was happening and it was just like caves and animals and fire, yes.
Society's
Wait,
trying
so
to
just to be clear-
build a
It
population.
made
Wait,
more
was-
sense for men to go hunt.
Sure.
If one man died, you could still keep the
I love
society
it.
alive.
Was the patriarchy stronger back then, or is the patriarchy stronger now?
The patriarchy is stronger now.
Hold on. The patriarchy is stronger now?
Of men thinking that they're greater than women and
Wait,
believing that
what
they're
is that?
Here we go again, rewriting definitions. She doesn't even know what patriarchy means.
more in charge of women.
What does that have to do with patriarchy?
That is the patriarchy. Men controlling more of what's going on.
Wait, so today, when women have the right to vote, the patriarchy is stronger?
Well, there was no voting back then, so
Well, there was
yes.
there was a period of time where more men had the right to vote.
Well,
than
right
women.
when voting started was when the men of the very primal societies started being like, wait, we're hunting, we're stronger, and we can control you.
Here we go again.
And slowly, women started being pushed aside and being told you're only
How about
allowed
the
to have
religion
women
aspect?
bear.
Wait, men.
Religion emerged, and men
Oh my God, all over
created
the
a
place.
rhetoric that they were more valuable than women. And even if
Wait.
that's not a value that's today, like men aren't really allowed to say like men are better than women at this stage of life. It was a big thing back then.
I reject the premise, but
That men thought they were better than back then in the 1600s.
yeah,
or
I mean, look,
whatever.
I'm not a Christian apologist, but my understanding of Christianity,
religion, not just Christianity.
hold on, let me finish. My understanding of Christianity is that there was a complementarian view insofar as men and women were different, but in terms of your value as a human being, your value, there's a specific term that I'll have to look up. There is actual equality between men and women in terms of your life value, but in terms of differences, of course there's differences between men and women. And you would agree because you said that men are stronger than women and men were sent out to be disposable, and if they died, not a big deal. So wouldn't you have to then make the argument that actually if women were more valued in society by the means of protection, you said, well, we're going to keep the women safe. They don't have to go out and do the dangerous, dirty activities, hunting, for example. Wouldn't this actually be evidence of like valuing women over men?
Yeah.
Okay. So
However, I said slowly that started to shift because as different inventions popped up and religion popped up and cities popped up, men who were quote unquote stronger and who created this whole rhetoric of like women need to stay home started evolving and excluding women from that, started becoming like philosophers and people who created religion and people who created jobs. Those were all men.
I could have sworn you said that women were better than men. They were smarter, better leaders, more capable of taking care of the world. Then why didn't you create your own religion where the masses would follow you guys? Wouldn't that be the smartest thing to do?
okay.
And slowly they pushed women down because, you know, it's human to want to be better than. It's human to want to win. It's survival. However, these men started just valuing women as objects.
Let me ask
You're a victim. Here we go, CSI.
We started off with our necks like put down on the floor, like, you know, like the way society worked, women were on the bottom, like with their life put down, and men were just running.
I mean,
Y'all smoking crack. Something is wrong with you people.
Is this what you consider intelligence?
fundamentally untrue.
How?
You guys are committing an apex fallacy. You're looking at a very small proportion of men and saying, like, do you genuinely think in like feudal Europe that all the men, because they were men, had like fantastic lives and men just loved it and all men had power? The reality is,
I never said that.
0.0001% of men had any sort of power. There were some women who had some power. And then if you look at the vast majority of everybody, they had no power whatsoever. Both men and women were oppressed. And you can make convincing arguments that actually men had it worse in many ways.
In what ways?
Historically and modern day.
In what ways?
Yeah, sure. So men were basically worker slaves, worker bees. They worked like extremely dangerous, physically
Who made them
laborious.
do that?
How would that matter?
Men
that sounds
made
like
them
victim
do that.
blaming. That sounds like victim blaming to me.
But
what would it matter?
It's the question of who was
What
on
does it have
top.
to do if they're men or not? I could just go to socioeconomic or class. I could just be like, it's the rich people. Why? What does it matter if it's men? There's only two sexes.
Because even though we can't prove it, and that's why this argument is so
You can't
futile.
prove it.
Well,
Okay, argument
you're gonna
one.
Gotcha, bitch.
Listen to me though. Are you going to listen?
Go ahead.
Even though we can't prove it, men have been in the front lines of almost everything that has really gone wrong in the world, and women have not been there.
Do me a favor, please. Get out of here. Get out of here, man. Shit, I'm saying.
And
Women
so,
have always been there through proxy.
but proxy of
Yes.
men controlling their lives.
No.
How so?
You're making the claim. You have to present the evidence that the men were controlling their
Because
lives.
every queen had a king, and the king was the ruler.
No, well, actually-
and she could get beat to death if she argued with him. You know what I mean?
Okay. First off, if a king, if he marries a woman, she becomes the queen, but he is the number one in power.
Exactly.
But a queen, she doesn't elevate, like if she gets married, she doesn't elevate that guy. He doesn't become king, he becomes queen consort. So it's not like if the woman who was queen gets married, that the man she's married to all of a sudden has like any sort of predomination
But
in the
she has a
relationship.
father.
She has a father?
Yeah.
Women
Wait, hold
were
on.
traded
No,
as like cattle. at one
no.
point.
If she's the queen, the father's dead. her father would have been the king, and then the father
Then
is
she had
presumably
a father that taught her everything she knew.
and that father would have also taught his sons in the same way. Are you
Okay.
talking about like, and when I use this word, I don't mean it in the way most people take it. You're talking about like grooming royalty, like
Yeah.
grooming for leadership.
Yes, that's exactly what happens.
Yes, but both sons and daughters were groomed into leadership positions.
Completely different ways.
But
No, it was exactly the same.
okay. Okay.
Can I ask you a question? So, what do you like about your boyfriend? I believe you're in a relationship, right? If you believe that women are better in many aspects, so do you believe that you're better than your boyfriend in almost every single aspect?
You know, talking about like a very small, like one-on-one ideal, maybe, but you know, not in a full.
But do you agree?
I acknowledge that in many ways, you know, in some of the arguments we have or whatever, I tend to be a little bit more forgiving than he is. I tend to be a little less emotional than he is. However, because he's a really great person, and he has been taught, he has like 8 sisters. He's been taught, he says all the time, like, I am the way I am because I was raised by so many women.
So, question, do you feel like you have a more masculine role in the relationship,
No.
seeing as he moved in with you, which would typically be something like the girl would do with the guy?
You know,
I could tell she has a weak man, because the way she behaves in public and talks about men is a reflection of his masculinity.
no, because I do acknowledge him as the masculine part. However, you know, if you're talking about
Or dominant?
patriarchal
Like do you wear the
views-
pants in the family? Do
You know-
do you handle the finances? Do you?
Technically, yes, but I enjoy him being.
But would you say that's a non-traditional relationship?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah. So I think there's nothing wrong with having views, and I feel like her relationship kind of mirrors her views. Like,
Yeah. And
She
he knows
has a
who I
submissive
am. He
boyfriend,
knows
is
what
what it
I
sounds
believe
like.
in. We have debates every once in a while. Like, we're very open with talking with each other about this stuff. And, you know, he's very comfortable with who I am. I'm comfortable with who he is.
So you think he'll give you a round of applause by listening to this
Oh,
podcast?
hell yes, he will. He listened to my whole Charlie Kirk thing. He said he was on my side.
He was, do you think, never mind. Okay.
Do I think what?
Let's be real. It's quite obvious. If your boyfriend said anything about Charlie Kirk destroying you in that argument, he'd be sleeping on the couch.
Don't
Said
worry
he
about
was
it.
just saying that to get in my pants.
How did you come to that conclusion?
I don't know, the look in your eyes.
The look in my eyes says,
Like you wanted to instigate a question.
hold on. Here was I think I said, was it because, like, that was the extent of the sentence.
I
How
don't
did
know,
you
that
gather?
was the only thing I could think that you were going to ask.
I just want to finish my point on the wage gap, because I was pointing out how it's actually, the wage gap could actually be due to sexism, but due to women's sexism.
Such as
Do you want a guy to pay for the first date?
I don't care.
You don't care?
I'll offer.
On the first date with your current boyfriend, did he pay for the date?
I don't know. I think we split it.
Does he ever pay for dates?
Yeah.
Okay.
He asks all the time.
be
Sometimes I'll
fair,
like
it
sneak up
sounds
and
like
like
he's-
force him to pay.
It sounds like he. well,
I mean,
he's
I'll
not
force
home and
myself to
stuff.
pay. Like I'll sneak off, be like, I'm going to the bathroom,
Sure.
and then I'll like slip my card.
Let's hear from the rest of the panel.
Yes.
Do you want a guy to pay for the first date?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I've paid for first dates
Sure,
also.
I don't dispute that women on occasion will pay for a first date. Of all the first dates you've been on, if you had to say like a percentage, what percent of the time does the guy pay for the first date?
A lot of the guys that I date in my personal life are not as financially.
They're broke?
Yeah.
Okay.
Period.
But overwhelmingly,
Sorry, I'm a sugar mama.
okay, the majority of the time, do men pay for the first date for you?
Yeah, when I'm going out on there's different levels of guys I date. There's guys that are hot and like fuckboy
Broke.
status. That's the guys that I will take out.
And those are the type of guys she likes. But don't blame all men for your dumb choices.
But the guys that are more of the husband material, yes, I would have them pay for the date.
Okay. What about you? Do you, when you go on first dates, who pays for the date?
Definitely the men pay
Okay.
for the first date. But it's just the first date doesn't mean he has to pay for any future date.
But of the people you have dated where it went beyond the first date, was there still a pattern of him paying for dates beyond the first date?
I think generally the men would pay for, would have a bigger share of the cost, but also depends on the income level, socioeconomic status of the men I date. So it varies.
Well, you're an attorney. Do you date many men who work at McDonald's?
No.
No.
But I bet if she met a really hot musician who like played and sang her song, she would totally potentially go out on some dates with him.
Would you
and pick
marry
up
him?
the bill.
Would you marry a guy who made like $50,000 a year?
I think just from a realistic standpoint, it would be hard to have a long-term relationship because I have a different perception about money. So if I want to go on an expensive vacation, I don't want to cover 100% the cost for a man who makes a lot less money than I do.
You would want to date a guy who makes maybe about as much as you or more.
Kind of less than me is okay, but at least we need to have like the same perception about money. Like for example, even if I'm dating a super rich guy, but I want to go on an expensive vacation just to treat ourselves, but then he'll be like, no, I want to save the money, even though you make like $1 million a year. So I think it's all about whether your perceptions are aligned.
Okay.
She's going to run into a whole lot of dating problems in the future. Her life is too superficial.
What about you? First dates, do you pay? Does the guy pay?
I definitely prefer if the man pays, and if it's a situation where we're splitting or I'm paying, the guy definitely gets docked in boyfriend potential points.
Oh, so
he almost gets friend zoned after that.
So let's say you're on a date, you guys went out for dinner, the waiter comes and he's like 2 checks. You're saying you would dock points.
100%. And I think
Would there be a second date?
whoever picks the restaurant, and let's say you pick a very, very expensive restaurant, then you should be willing to pay if the other party, when the check comes, doesn't reach.
What about you?
I think the man should pay on the first date.
What about you?
All day.
The men should pay.
Felicity, what about you?
Men should pay.
Okay. Well, Maren, you've heard quite a few women here. Are any of you like consider yourself more liberal or feminist or?
I don't consider myself any of that.
Or do you consider yourself more liberal or?
I don't think I'm very liberal, a little bit conservative, I would say.
Okay. Well, so, Maren, let's go ahead and just say that there are no liberal women who ever want men to pay for first dates, which I actually think is.
That's definitely.
I think there's actually a lot of liberal women who still want men to
of course.
adhere to more traditional dating standards. Hold on, let me finish.
It's always nice if a man pays. It's always like, oh, thank you.
Yeah, but do you think men can get away with saying, it's nice when women pay?
Yes.
Well, they can get away with saying that,
It
but
is
can they
nice
expect?
when women pay.
Sure,
She never keeps it real. Her need to be right is so overwhelming.
grant that, but do you think that men can realistically go into a date with the expectation that the woman's going to pay the entire bill?
I wouldn't say anyone should go into a date expecting that someone's going to pay the entire bill. I've only been on a couple dates. I've always said I'll pay for my food. It's a first date. You don't even know me. We might not even get along.
How many first dates have you been on?
Less than 5.
Have you split all of them, or has the guy ever paid? You've split all of them?
Sometimes they're like, no, please let me pay. And I'm not going to say no. Okay. But I'll say, no, I promise I can pay. I don't want you to pay my whole bill. We just met. And sometimes they'll be like, it's okay, fine, you can pay. And I'm totally fine paying. And it doesn't mean I'm going to count them out of my life.
Sure.
But...
So I guess to wrap up on this, the argument that I was making here is that even if there was only, say, 50% of the female population that had a strong preference towards men being providers and for men paying for dates, men paying in other ways, whatever it is, this would actually indicate that there's a mating pressure that exists on men that doesn't exist the other way.
But
so by women's own dating preferences, and this is not just, I think, a social construct, but also I think there's a biological evolutionary basis for women wanting providers. And when you were talking about the days of huts and the days of caves, the men went out and hunted and the women stayed. The men were providers, the men were protectors. I think based on women's own stated, not just stated, but actual preferences as it relates to what they find attractive in a long-term partner, which typically relates to a man who's capable of providing. And you heard it from here. We've heard it a bunch from women on the show. If the guy won't pay for the first date, that's it. I think that
I didn't say that's it. I said you got docked points.
Okay, fair enough. Whatever it is.
You can redeem yourself.
I guess.
Okay, but he has to work harder. And
you see, that's the problem right there. Why would we need to redeem ourselves to ungrateful women that think they're entitled to our money? We pay for the first dates because we want to. not because we need to.
Some other metric.
Because anytime
to
you're
make
on a
up-
first
but
date,
hold on, let
it's
me
a
make.
tick-
That's
it's
fine.
a- but
Hey,
try
I'm
to
not going to get
tally
into the weeds with you. I'm going to finish my
Do you
point
pay
here.
for the date when you're going out on your first date? Do you pay for dinner?
Yeah, I pay. So the point I was trying to make here is that if women have this mating pressure that exists, that doesn't exist the other way back. Like if I'm going to be going out on a date with a woman, there's no world that exists where I'm going to either have the assumption, like women do, or even think it's a possibility that when I go on a date with her, she's going to pay the entire thing. It's dubious if she'll even go 50-50. I've had that, that's happened, but the majority of the time there is a very strong expectation that men are going to pay on first dates. This is not like some patriarchal system. This is actually a system, hold on, I'll get to you in a sec. This is a system that women enforce. This isn't like men aren't forcing women to have a preference towards providers. I'm sure men would like be super enthused if women were just simping for them all the time and just like, here's money, taking them on dates. The reality is women place a mating pressure on men that doesn't exist the other way. And there's plenty of other factors, but I think looking at this alone would explain any supposed or alleged wage gap that exists. Because essentially it boils down to this. Women are saying, you can't have sex with me, you can't be in a relationship with me, you won't be able to reproduce, which is like a biological imperative for both sexes, but as it relates to men.
We all need each other for sure.
But if women are basically saying, I won't date you, I won't have sex with you, I won't give you my time, I won't give you my attention, I won't give you children down the road, essentially, because dating leads to relationship, leads to marriage, leads to children, seems like that's a really big mating pressure on men. So if men like somewhere back, either it's in their conscious or subconscious brain, are thinking, if I don't have a high-paying, high-status job, and that's going to prevent me from getting a partner and getting a woman and eventually having children, I think that would be a massive motivating pressure that women are putting on men that would lead them to greater motivation and greater achievement and ultimately greater earnings. So the earnings gap, the wage gap, whatever you like to call it, is actually explained by women's sexism.
That's what I call a chain reaction.
Manifest my own destiny. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. The perfect recipe. May they remember me. My words will live on. I'm guided by an energy, a flame. Hold it close to you. Check out my melodies. Is it the media that's been leading you? I'll show you a thing. Misdirection, what's the message? They don't want you to win.
As much as we all like to rip on men, this is time to take some accountability.